Hello and welcome to Newsroom. I'm your host Sharmeen Ali. For the first time in this last recent month, we've seen that the US lawmakers on Capitol Hill are actually holding hearings about the situation in Indian occupied Kashmir. And one such hearing was held last week by the Tom Lantos Commission for Human Rights, and it was called Kashmir in Context. Now, in this particular hearing, a number of people raised their voices about the situation in Kashmir, and including the Congress persons who were present in the meeting. They expressed their concerns as well, and we'll be talking about that and what sort of conclusion they came to, which unanimously they had decided that there needs to be international observers allowed in the region, and also that the internet blackout should be ended. So what further actions are going to take on this decision in this meeting, this hearing that took place last week, that is yet to be seen, and we'll see that in the upcoming days. The Foreign Office has refuted India's claims about the narrative that they're spreading, about the fake narrative that they're spreading about terrorism emerging from Pakistan, causing terrorism militancy in Indian occupied Kashmir. They gave a very strong statement about that, and also about the recent articles and interviews that the Indian Home Affairs Minister has been giving regarding that the situation in Indian occupied Kashmir is returned to normal, which clearly is not the case right now. Pakistani Prime Minister and President congratulated the newly elected President of Sri Lanka, Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa, and they tweeted earlier and congratulated him on his win. He is known as a person who put down the Tamil insurgency a decade back, and that insurgency which was backed by India and which caused the loss of lives of about 100,000 people. President Dr. Arif Alvi tweeted that it gives me immense pleasure to extend my warmest congratulations to your electoral victory, Mr. Gotabaya, as President of Sri Lanka, and we hope to continue working with you for the betterment of our people and to advance our shared interests of regional peace, stability and prosperity. And Prime Minister Imran Khan tweeted, congratulations to Gotabaya Rajapaksa on victory in Sri Lankan presidential elections. Pakistan looks forward to working closely with him and with Sri Lanka for further deepening and broadening our brotherly ties and close cooperation for peace, progress and prosperity of our people. Also on this program, we'll be discussing how the federal government has taken further actions to implement FATF and to curb smuggling. And for that, the Prime Minister has directed to form task forces at the national, provincial and divisional levels in order to curb the smuggling from our borders. And for that, he's also ordered new equipment, and which is to be procured, and the details of that we'll talk about as well. And also the government has decided to raise a highly technically qualified battalion of paramilitary forces and customs officials under the Border Monitoring Initiative. So to discuss all of this today, we have with us in our studios Ms. Tasneem Aslam, who is a former spokesperson for the Foreign Office of Pakistan. Thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us on our program today. Let's talk first about the our first story, which is about the congressional hearing, Tom Lantos Commission for Human Rights, the hearing that they held last week. You must have been following this, and you're knowledgeable about such events that occur in congressional hearings. What do you feel is the significance of such a hearing to begin with? And then we can go into the details about that.
Yeah, first, this was the second hearing on the Capitol Hill. The first one was held some month and a half back, and this time it was the commission dealing with specifically with human rights, and again they had number of human rights activists, Kashmiris, who came there to speak about, and not just Kashmiris, also other human rights activists. And one thing was very clear, and there were, I think, a couple of Indian representatives also, and they were, I think, snubbed thoroughly by Kashmiris when they said that, claimed that situation was normal, and their response was, then if you claim the situation is normal, why don't you open up Kashmir? Let observers go, let human rights activists go, let journalists go, and let them see what is happening there. So again, like the first hearing, what came out very clearly is first, the Indian atrocities in Kashmir continue unabated. I will also draw your attention to a recent television discussion in which a retired Indian general said in front of many people on live television that it is okay, it is legitimate to murder, kill Kashmiris, and it is legitimate to rape Kashmiri women. And there were people, the house full, who were clapping. It's very serious. Probably the world has still not realized how far India has gone, how rabid and insane that country has become.
Absolutely.
Under RSS BJP dispensation. The events like the hearing on the Capitol Hill and the European Parliament, British Parliament and other forums are important. That focus remains on what is happening, although practically it's not helping Kashmiris, but still they know the world is talking about them. I would like to say here that of course PTV is the official channel and you talk about and coverage is given to Kashmir, but it's very unfortunate that rest of our media is not covering Kashmir the way it should.
Right. Because the discourse needs to be kept alive at this point.
It needs to be kept alive, not because we want to politicize a situation, but because Kashmiris deserve this much.
Exactly.
And also, it is Pakistan's duty as a party to the dispute. It is Pakistan's duty to talk about, draw attention, world attention, keep this issue alive, talk about it, and also to the extent possible provide whatever support we can.
Absolutely. So, ma'am, going back to this hearing now, the number of the Congress persons at that hearing expressed that it is a concern to them what the human rights situation is there. And then you also had the panelists who you were talking about. There were Kashmiris. There was somebody, John Sifton, from who's Asia Advocacy Director of Human Rights Watch. You also had a professor from Ohio University, professor of anthropology and law and justice, Haley Duchinsky, and other than, you know, the people who are also affected. And you also had a lady, Sunanda Vashisht, who was the only person talking about the human rights against Hindus in Indian occupied Kashmir. And then, okay, she started off with that, but then she became very aggressive about Pakistan. She became very unruly and screaming about terrorism from Pakistan and all, which seemed very scripted to me, which is the usual Indian BJP sort of narrative about
I don't think
Pakistan.
that went down very well there. Because everyone knows what is happening. At the last hearing also, when the State Department representatives tried to hint at that, okay, there is another side to it. India says that Pakistan is supporting militancy and terrorism, and congressmen said that no, there is no evidence of that.
There is no evidence.
So
right, and
everyone knows that this raising the specter of terrorism sold for a while in the West, because the agenda of painting Muslims as terrorists coincided with that. It converged. But it has, I think, gone too far. And in the case of Indian occupied Kashmir, it is now very obvious to everyone that there is no infiltration from Pakistani side. And even if there were Kashmiris from Azad Kashmir were going, it is their legitimate right to go.
Exactly.
Because it's a nation divided and they have the right to fight on behalf of their brethren. But even then, we have not allowed this, and two, we allowed India to make a material change on the line of control by erecting the fences and barbed wires, by erecting those and putting up, blocking any kind of movement between the two parts of Kashmir. So it's a bit disingenuous for India to claim that despite the barbed wires and despite their more than 800,000 troops and paramilitary, one or two individuals, and if you ask them, they would tell you, okay, 50 people or 100 people, terrorists are there. I mean, it's not, it doesn't gel. The Indian story doesn't gel.
Absolutely.
And I don't think anyone is buying it anymore.
It's
on the
become
Capitol
old.
Hill,
Yeah.
it was, yeah, it's very trite now. And they have milked the terrorism cow to the hill. I don't think there is any more possibility that they can stigmatize Kashmiris' movement and struggle for their right to self-determination by these baseless,
Exactly.
totally baseless.
And now Representative Sheila Jackson-Lee, she said in a response to what this Indian lady was saying, that to label a country with acts of those who no one agrees with is a dangerous phenomenon, number one. And also, they had also, all of them agreed, even the Human Rights Watch Asia Advocacy Director John Sifton, he had said that, okay, we've also accused and talked about Pakistan and, you know, terrorism, whatever, in the past. And now going forward, to just use that as an excuse that India does not have to take its responsibility about what it's doing in Indian occupied Kashmir is just not okay. So here you had a view which was showing, you know, acknowledging both sides of the situation, but yet he was saying that no, it's still not okay for you to just put the whole entire blame on one country. So you had all these people kind of putting her down, like you said, snubbing that.
Then we see that what is happening in Kashmir is part of India's overall policy now towards Muslims and other minorities, and nobody is allowed to talk about it. There are some brave people in India who are covering what is happening in the Indian occupied Kashmir. They are bringing out those heart-wrenching stories of how families are suffering, how pellet gun victims are suffering. They are not even allowed to get first aid or treatment. And 2 days ago, Indian officials raided the Amnesty International offices.
Wow.
Amnesty International India offices. These are offices that are run by Indians, and they also hoisted some flag or fake cases against them, that they are getting foreign funding, etc. Okay. So there is not just a very relentless brutality, but also absolutely no tolerance to let anyone talk about it. And we must not forget the role of Indian Supreme Judiciary, Supreme Court, what they have done. What they did in response to petitions in Kashmir was shameless. And we have also seen the judgment on Ayodhya.
Yeah.
And even Indians are surprised that court could do something so blatant.
Exactly, right.
So it fits into the overall policy that direction that India has taken under RSS bigotry and a very twisted ideology, which brooks no tolerance for anyone other than Hindus in India.
Right, exactly. Now this same lady, her name was Sunanda, she was saying that she had, okay, now I'd like to put it in perspective that there were 7 panelists who spoke about this issue. 6 out of 7 of them, they agreed that there should be a right to self-determination for the Kashmiris, which they've been promised, and it's by international law, etc., and treaties. She was the only person saying that no, the plebiscite will never happen, so forget the plebiscite and just, you know, go and handle Pakistan. And so to that, the response to her was that the response that she was given was that you cannot take away any area's right of self-determination,
Exactly.
no matter whether you say it's going to happen or not. This is their basic right. So a lot of the claims that the narrative that Indians are putting forward now are not being listened to much more in the West, and especially not in the Congress, because as you can see, there are some very, very balanced and sane voices there in Capitol Hill.
Yes, there are. And what India has done, obviously it has brought a lot of misery on Kashmiris, and they are passing through a very difficult time, but at the same time they should take heart and some solace that it has also brought the international attention on the fundamental dispute.
Right.
And their right to self-determination. Increasingly, people are talking about it, human rights activists are talking about it, parliamentarians around the world are talking about it. Unfortunately, governments are not talking about it. Governments, particularly those that can influence Modi's policy, are not talking about it because of their own interests. But it is incumbent in Pakistan to continue to bear that moral pressure on them.
Right.
It's absolutely necessary, and also keep the issue alive domestically. Obviously, people are very upset by these developments, but somehow it seems that our media or certain people in the media have moved completely away from
This very important topic.
this very important issue, as if it is something now done and dusted,
Right.
which is not true.
No, it's not, because it's
Not for Kashmiris, not for Pakistan.
Exactly. So Representative Sheila Jackson Lee in this hearing was very, very firm. She said that she asked the Modi government to use power for humanity and not oppression. Congressman Throne warned India that enhancing security can mean ensuring human rights, and the two are not mutually exclusive. And then also Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee suggested that she write a letter to President Trump and to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, as well as to Prime Minister Modi, about the main concerns that they have right now, that international observers and a Congress committee should be able to allow to go to visit Indian occupied Kashmir as well as the Pakistani side of Kashmir and find out the situation for what it is. And the second condition was that the internet blackout should be released, because of the fact that internet is used in everything in day-to-day life nowadays, and it's depriving the Kashmiri people of allowing their relatives to communicate with them, getting medical advice from their doctors wherever they may be, and running businesses, etc. Ma'am. So these are the two things that they were sort of unanimously agreeing upon. Even the Indian Shananda, the lady Shananda, who was going against what everyone was saying, even she had to agree on this.
Yes, that obviously she couldn't have sat there and claimed that there are no restrictions, but they you see those very overt restrictions, but there are also some covert operations that India is running. If you had seen, there was a report last week that in Europe alone, India is running some 260 or 270 internet outlets through which false and negative stories about Pakistan are planted. Secondly, we have also seen how they have arm twisted the Twitter and other social media forums to block or at least minimize anti-India tweets or criticism of Indian government's policies. So that there is that overall environment which is now which has started now irking the international community. By that I don't mean governments. Even if they are irked for their self-interest, they would not say so. Most of them, at least publicly, would not criticize India. but the public opinion is shifting against India.
They're not
And
buying the story
yes,
that
nobody
everything
is
is
buying
normal.
it, and you now increasingly see criticism of India by human rights activists, by media, big media, houses, editorials. So the atmosphere of that the world, the make-believe world that India built around itself, and the story it presented, shining India and India going to places, that has started crumbling now.
Exactly. So, ma'am, some of the recommendations that were given by these panelists was that, number one, the Draconian Laws of Public Safety Act in India, that should be reviewed and they should address that with the Indian government. Secondly, the detention of children should be absolutely prohibited, and also that there should be a due process when the detentions that the Indian authorities are using just arbitrarily without any kind of case against a person. And also John Sifton from Human Rights Watch, he said that whenever US government official or officials visit India for trade talks or any such thing, the Kashmir issue should be brought up, that this is our concern and we would like you to do this, make it a part of all the deliberations with them. So in your opinion now going forward, they've talked about self-determination, they've talked about lifting the blackout, they've talked about allowing observers to visit, and these were the other recommendations. What's going to happen next now? What do you think this, this commission is going to do? They're going to recommend to Congress about taking an action. Do you think this will translate to some concrete action?
Obviously, they will make recommendations, because there have been powerful testimonies by the experts and panelists who participated, and obviously they have their own sources of information as well. They know what is happening in Indian occupied Kashmir, and if you look at the reports of Commissioner on Human Rights, two reports. The second one, which was released prior to the 5th August steps in June this year, it also talks about calls on India to repeal all these draconian measures, remove those laws, and also respect the Kashmiris' right to self-determination. So that has been now coming up again and again, something that India, and the fact that the UN Security Council held consultations also, that India's claim that first it was a bilateral issue in Pakistan and India, that, and then they claim that no, it is an internal matter, that has now been completely rejected by the international community. Even the governments that are very pro India, they also, although Alice Wells had great difficulty uttering these words, but ultimately under repeated questions by Congress men and women, she had to acknowledge that yes, US policy is that it's not an internal matter of India. And about the recommendation that observers, human rights observers and men should have access to both Azad Kashmir and IOK. If you recall that the High Commissioner for Human Rights also asked for access, and we accepted because we have nothing to hide. We said we would welcome your experts to come and visit. But we have one condition, India should also accept. But India never responded. And they are not likely to respond to this. Now, thirdly, I don't see in the short term Congress recommendations or demands becoming so strong to bring about a change in US administration's policies, particularly the State Department and their defense establishment, because they look at India from the prism of China, from the prism of what they plan to do, what their agenda is about this region, and the larger region, by which I mean the Middle East, Central
Right.
Asia and all that.
Mm.
And of course, China is a factor. So, in the short term, I don't see any policy change.
Okay.
But obviously, as the noise, as the voices in support of Kashmiris and against Indian oppression become louder and louder, it will become difficult for any government, no matter how pro India, BJP.
And in all of
Yes.
this, we're talking about the different countries that are involved in this dispute, India, Pakistan. Yet at the same time, whatever the end result is of the Kashmir solution, it has to include Kashmiri voices. This is something
Absolutely.
that's,
I mean, we
that's
have
often overlooked.
this is no. Pakistan has never overlooked it, because unlike India, Pakistan, it has never been just about a disputed territory. The Prime Minister said it repeatedly. He was asked about it
Yes.
In New York, and I think earlier also. And he said whether if Kashmir became independent, he said it's the aspiration of the Kashmiri people that is important. Secondly,
per the wishes of the Kashmiri
one
people.
thing more, it's not just words. Pakistan has had a number of constitutions over the years. In every constitution, one article was a permanent feature.
Right.
Which is the text, which means I don't recall the exact language, but the sense of that article is that when plebiscite is held, and in case Kashmiris decide to join Pakistan, the future relationship between Pakistan and Kashmir will be decided through mutual consultations.
Absolutely.
So, what does that show you?
Exactly.
That aspiration of
commitment
Kashmiris has
there
always
to
been.
We have to now move on to the next topic, which is the presidential election in Sri Lanka, which resulted in Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa winning, and he's going to be the next president of Sri Lanka. We have online with us Mr. Kamran Yusuf, who's going to comment on this. Thank you for joining us, Kamran Yusuf.
Yeah, thank you.
Can you tell us now this election of Mr. Rajapaksa as the new president of Sri Lanka? What is the popular sentiment about him? He was the person who put down the Tamil insurgency 10 years back, and he's known to be pretty tough on terrorism, etc. So what are your remarks on that?
Well, certainly, Gotabaya Rajapaksa is actually a brother of Mahinda Rajapaksa, who ruled Sri Lanka, who was president of Sri Lanka between 2005 and 2015. So he certainly belongs to a politician family. As far as his background is concerned, as you pointed out, that he was a retired colonel and also served as defense secretary at the time when this Tamil insurgency was going on, and both Gotabaya Rajapaksa and his brother Mahinda Rajapaksa were credited with, ending the 26-year-long insurgency. So he has that. Even people called him Terminator because he takes tough decisions. So that is the kind of popularity that he has. So in that sense, he is known as a tough guy, and many people believe that the kind of challenges, the security challenges Sri Lanka is facing at the moment, so he would be useful in that sense.
Right. So as far as Pakistan stand on who Pakistan would have wanted to win these elections, this has been a good victory for Pakistan because his opponent was highly supported by India.
Yes, I mean, if we follow Sri Lankan politics very closely, there has always been interest by outsiders. We have to go back to 2015 when Mahinda Rajapaksa was defeated by his rivals. And at that time, Mahinda Rajapaksa publicly blamed Indian Secret Agency RAW, the CIA, as well as certain other European countries that they were behind his defeat. And the reason for that is that Mahinda Rajapaksa was considered to be pro-China. So in that sense, there was a lot of competing interests going on. So in the current elections, again, Gotabaya Rajapaksa was considered close to China, as well as he is also close to Pakistan, because few people have an idea that when he was serving in the Sri Lankan army, Gotabaya Rajapaksa was trained in Pakistan, and also he was graduated from Quetta Staff College. So he had long association with Pakistan. And as a defense secretary, you know that Pakistan played a very significant role and helped Sri Lanka in defeating the Tamil insurgency. So in that sense, Pakistan was hoping Gotabaya Rajapaksa to win the elections, because his rival candidate, Sajid Premadasa, was representing United National Front, the party of current ruling party, and the Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe. And Ranil Wickremesinghe was considered close to India, and many Tamil, those who were mostly Hindus, voted, United National Front candidate. So in that sense, it was a setback for India, as well as other Western countries who wanted their man to be elected as president. But on the contrary, now Gotabaya Rajapaksa has been elected as president. So this will have, significance in terms of, what the other countries, particularly other regional powers, look at Sri Lanka.
Right, and now in September, when the Sri Lankan cricket team was meant to be visiting, and they visited Pakistan, there was a security alert about terror threat in Pakistan, which turned out to be apparently Indian government, set by the Indian government. It was a fake security threat, and that's also because the Prime Minister, the Indian authorities were close to the Sri Lankan Prime Minister, who's there right now.
Yes, exactly. I mean, you rightly pointed out that in September, when all was set for the visit of Sri Lankan cricket team, there was a security alert issued by the Sri Lankan Prime Minister office, forcing Sri Lankan cricket authorities to reassess the security arrangements. But later, it was emerged that security alert came from India, and India apparently used the Prime Minister office of Sri Lanka to sabotage Sri Lankan cricket tour to Pakistan. So that shows the closeness the current Sri Lankan Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe has with the Indian authorities. And don't forget that in 2016, when Pakistan was supposed to host the South Asian Association Regional Cooperation Summit in Pakistan, India, we know that boycotted that summit. And the Sri Lankan Prime Minister, Ranil Wickremesinghe, was also one of those who backed India on that particular decision. So there was clear indication that Ranil Wickremesinghe, the current Sri Lankan Prime Minister, was backing Indian policies in the region. So in that sense, there is a good news for Pakistan, because now they have a president who is considered close to Pakistan. So in that sense, the whole objective of India to isolate Pakistan regionally, can be defeated in that sense.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kamran Yusuf, for joining us online. So, Ma'am Tasneem, now what we were discussing about the newly elected Sri Lankan president. So, Pakistan supported his election, and that, President and Prime Minister of Pakistan congratulated him as well on being elected. Now, we were talking about how the Prime Minister was very close to the President, to the Indian government. And we also had earlier this year, the April attacks in Sri Lanka, which were on Easter Sunday, and 269 people were killed. And due to that fact also, people wanted a president like this to come and curb terrorism and extremism in their country. So what is your opinion about his whole approach towards terrorism and extremism?
First, let me say we did not support. Obviously, the President and Prime Minister congratulated,
right,
but Pakistan does not interfere in the internal electoral processes of other countries. India
right.
does that. So obviously, seeing a member of family who's been friendly with Pakistan, who enjoyed our help at the helm of affairs of Sri Lanka, in fighting the terrorism that was hoisted on them by India. It's a good, I mean, for our relations. But as far as supporting or being involved in that process, let me make it clear that,
it was
yes,
good for Pakistan
yes,
that he's the president.
true.
Right.
Secondly, we know that a very capable man is now at the helm of affairs. He will take strong measures to curb terrorism. But we should be mindful that India and others were not happy at his election, because he's also seen in the Western capitals as somebody who is close to China. So there will be efforts, unfortunately, to undermine. They will have to be mindful of that. We have seen India doing that in the past in Sri Lanka, in Maldives, in Nepal. You would recall the big standoff between Nepal and India when India choked all the supplies to them, and because India wanted certain constitutional measures that Nepal was undertaking not to go through, and they asked Nepal to do away with those, and when they said we can't, this is, we have internal consensus and our people want it, they were subjected to one of the worst blockades in history.
Right. Okay.
So obviously, Mr. Rajapaksa will have to contend with Indian shenanigans and their efforts to destabilize and perhaps once again try to reignite terrorism in Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
And obviously,
the April attacks weren't done by RAW just to blame Muslims.
They have done that. I mean, if you look at terrorist attacks inside India, most of them have been traced back to Indian security forces.
Exactly.
I mean, this is not something we are saying. These are the reports, and in case of Makkah Masjid, Malagaon attack, Ajmer Sharif, and then in Indian occupied Kashmir, massacre of Sikhs. All these attacks were
done internally by RAW. Ma'am, now
flag.
I'd also like to get your opinion about now Pakistan's measures for FATF compliance and the inclusion of now task force and an action plan to curb smuggling by the Prime Minister, and also the Prime Minister wants to take steps to include the establishment of crossing point task forces at the national, provincial as well as divisional level. So they were taking these steps, and also the Prime Minister is setting up new battalions to curb smuggling as well. This is all to curb smuggling across our borders. Can you give your comments about that?
Well, I think in certain areas, FATF has gone way beyond its mandate at the behest of India and the United States and countries like Australia or France. They have gone beyond their mandate. I'll give you an example. For instance, Hafiz Saeed and a few other people who are listed by the UN counterterrorism mechanism, the requirements are three. They should not collect funds, they should not carry arms, they should not travel abroad. But what FATF demands, they should be behind bars. What the US demands, that they should be arrested. So they are. Secondly, when we talk about money laundering, a lot of money has been laundered out of Pakistan. It has gone to Western through their banking system to their banks and offshore accounts. Why this does not apply to them?
Right. Okay. So that's right. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ma'am Tasneem Asam. We've run out of time for the program today. We'll see you next time on Newsroom. That's bye bye from me, Sharmeen Ali, for now, and our team.